Please be seated. Well, it's good to see you all here this morning on a very wonderful occasion. It draws us together to celebrate, I think I could say the most cataclysmic event, the most important event in all of human history, bar none. 3 years ago it was that we experienced Easter, the earliest that I'm sure anybody has ever experienced it. It was around the third week in March, and this week we get to experience it probably the latest that many of us, not all of us, but many of us will ever experience it. It was this late once before, back in 1943. I won't ask you if you were around then, but some of us probably were. Actually, it was April 25th that year. But it's not going to be this late again if I didn't miss the dates on the chart that I looked at until 2095. So most likely, an awful lot of us here are not going to be around for that. And so this will be the latest Easter that we experience in our lifetimes for many of us. It kind of sometimes brings up the question, how do we figure the date for Easter? And for those of you who maybe didn't learn this in confirmation class or maybe have forgotten, there's a rather interesting way that came about. I'll give you the short version of it. But in 325 A.D., Constantine, who was emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, convened the Council of Nicaea. Some of you know a bit about that. And among the business before the council for that day was to establish a uniform date to celebrate Easter, because around the empire it was celebrated at different times. There were two basic arguments or camps that were vying for that date. Out of that council came the Easter rule, setting the date, which is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. Okay? You got that solid in your mind. The first full moon, the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. There were, like I say, two camps. As oftentimes church councils, they weren't unanimous. The Eastern bishops wanted to schedule Easter in conjunction with the Jewish festival of Passover, since after all, Jesus went to Jerusalem for the Passover. But the Western bishops preferred a date corresponding to the beginning of spring, because that was a time already established for a lot of pagan celebrations. And so as they were carrying the message out to places that hadn't heard the message about Jesus yet, they said, let's just capitalize on the momentum that's already there in that culture and keep it going. Well, the Western church won out and came up with that wonderful time, the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. But then the church split later on, and the Eastern church went with their original thing, closer to Passover. Sometimes Easter is celebrated on the same day, and sometimes between those two groups it can be separated by as much as 5 weeks. So if you ever wonder about that, that's kind of a short version of how it comes about. That's all nice info, and maybe something that you could use when you're in the hardware store or the grocery line to start up a spiritual conversation with somebody. Do you know how Easter is chosen, what the date is? But it really kind of leads to another question, the question of why. And really not why the date, but why do we celebrate the resurrection? Have you ever thought about why we celebrate the resurrection? Some of you know the answer to that, but I ran across a statistic recently that actually came out by Barna last year, and they did their thing and asked just the general adult population in America, what's Easter? What's significant about Easter? Only 42% said it had anything to do with the resurrection of Christ. Only 42%. That means we live in basically a non-Christian country, if you think about it. A majority of people just man, woman on the street who were asked, did not know Easter had anything to do with Jesus Christ being raised from the dead. Fact is, only 2%, that's 1 out of 50 adults, said that they would describe Easter as the most important holiday of their faith. Now, we can read a little bit too much into that, but it ought to be, at least the way I think of things, it seems to me it ought to be at least a little bit closer to 50%, because some might say, well, Christmas, because you can't die and be raised from the dead unless you come, first off, but still just 2%. Now, I know where maybe a lot of you are with respect to that question about knowing about Easter and knowing about the resurrection, but I don't know everybody here, and if this is a somewhat representative group of the general population, which I don't think it is, but even if it's somewhere close, there may be 1 or 2 people, maybe more, that really didn't know. Is Easter just about chocolate bunnies and colored eggs? I don't know. But it could be that if there is someone here that didn't know that it's about the resurrection, it'd just be because you haven't maybe given it much thought. That's very easy to happen in today's culture. Sometimes, to help us understand the importance of it, perspective is very, very helpful. It helps us to be motivated to think about it. I want to show you a couple of pictures. Tina's going to maybe some of you have seen some of these pictures. They've been floating around the internet for a few years. But Tina, if you put that first picture up here, this is a picture of an accident. Have any of you seen this picture before? Okay, I see one hand. Seriously, is anybody? There's a few hands, but most of you haven't. This is a picture of an accident. This truck was traveling in this direction, as I understand it. Obviously lost control, hit the guardrail, and flipped up and landed over here. And if I remember the story correctly, the people that were in, I think there was 2, they were hurt but not seriously, and it was just almost miraculous. But then look at the second picture. You can't see it very well here. There's the truck. This is a 2,000-foot straight down drop. They missed it by about 3 or 4 feet. Perspective helps us to understand, helps the people inside the truck to understand how close they came to death, how close they came to losing it all, everything. But they were able to walk away from that. I wish you could see that. It's really... I'm sorry? Well, that's all right. We'll put it up after the service. You look at it after the service. We'll turn the light out then. You know, when we get perspective about something, it does help us to appreciate it a whole lot more. And maybe that's what we need on the resurrection. Perspective. What does it mean? I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to touch on some other things. I'm going to touch on hell for a few minutes because, well, that helps. That's part of backing up and looking at the big picture. Some might say, how could you possibly talk on hell on Easter Sunday morning? I think, well, there may be not any better, more appropriate time to talk about hell. You know, Jesus, by some estimations, if you evaluate all of his teaching and everything, he included hell in about 13% of all of his teaching, and somebody estimated or evaluated that 2/3 of all of his parables, he talked about hell and the resurrection, judgment and the resurrection. So Max Lucado, I think, said it well in something that somebody sent me this week. He said, Jesus wasn't cruel or capricious, but he was blunt. And his candor stuns. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of that stuff today, and I might be a little bit blunt. First thing, let me say this morning is that every single person that's here this morning, or maybe if happened to hear me through the internet because these get recorded and broadcast, every one of us is going to die. Every one of us. The saying is sure, none of us are getting out of here alive. Unless Jesus tarries. You know that Jesus is coming back. We don't know when. It could be soon. Could be before this service is over. That doesn't mean I'm going to preach until he comes back, okay? None of us are getting out of here alive. We don't know when that'll happen. That picture shows they got pretty close to it. But we don't. Some of us will have ample warning that the time is drawing near, but some of us may not have much warning, if any warning at all. Regardless of when that happens or how that happens, we should be ready. We should always be ready. Second thing I want to say is that all of us are going to be judged. The Bible says it's appointed for man to die once, and after that comes the judgment. We are all going to be judged. And do you know what judgment is about? Judgment is about whether we end up going to heaven or we end up in hell. The Bible teaches those are the only two options. There's no wiggle room in that according to the Bible. And so, it's about whether we know Christ. Actually, more importantly, more accurately, I might say it's about whether Christ knows us. When the bottom line comes, that's the bottom line. Yeah, we can say we know him, but does he know us? Go look at Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23 in particular. And those people thought they knew him well. Just 3 verses, all you have to read. They thought they knew him well. But Jesus said to them, I never knew you. Depart from me. I can't imagine hearing that. I can't imagine hearing that. So it's not just that we know him, but that he knows us. But of course, if he knows us, we will most assuredly know him. And I don't mean just know about him, but we would really know him. If Jesus does not know you,